The village of Marlowe Fen knew her as Mrs. Ellen Hale, a widow of modest means with a son and a story no one troubled to question, because grief, real or invented, tends to close doors rather than open them. The midwife who delivered her boy never asked why a gentlewoman's hands were so unused to scrubbing floors. The vicar's widow who took her in never asked why she flinched at the sound of a carriage on the road. Some kindnesses are simply offered without a price attached, and Eleanor had learned, in the months since Ravenscar Hall, to recognize them and be grateful without weeping. She named her son Henry, after no one, because giving him his father's name felt like handing a weapon to a man who had already proven what he'd do with one. He had Sebastian's eyes. She noticed it first in the candlelight of a rented room above a chandler's shop, days after his birth, and had to set him down and walk to the window so the midwife would not see her face. Grey, clear, and faintly grave, even in infancy, the eyes of a man who weighed everything before he spoke. She loved her son so completely it frightened her, and some nights, when he slept, she allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of hatred for the man who would never know he had a face like that walking the earth. 5 minutes, no more. She could not afford more. She never wrote to Sebastian. Not when the cold came early and the coal ran short. Not when Henry, just past his first year, took a fever so severe the vicar's widow sat up with her through 2 nights praying aloud. Her silence was not surrender. It was the one piece of power left to her, and she spent it like a woman who understood exactly what it was worth. And there was, too, a quieter reason. She rarely let herself examine. Her marriage lines were real, recorded by a country parson with a witness's signature beside her own. Whatever lie had been told about her, the law itself did not agree with it. She had simply never found anyone willing to ask the law instead of the gossip. She could not have known that, 80 miles away, her silence was beginning to undo a duke from the inside out. Ravenscar Hall, by the 2nd year, had become a house of closed curtains and unanswered correspondence. Sebastian had told himself, in the weeks after he sent her away, that he had done what duty required, that a man poisoned by betrayal owed nothing to the woman who had betrayed him. He told himself this so many times that for a while he nearly believed it. But belief, he was discovering, is a poor substitute for certainty. And certainty was the one thing he had never actually possessed. He had acted on his mother's word and a packet of letters he had never been permitted to examine too closely, because she had wept while presenting them, and a son does not interrogate his weeping mother. Not even a duke, not even one trained from the cradle to interrogate everything else. It was a fall from his horse on the North Road, in the autumn of the 2nd year, that broke something open in him, not the injury itself, which mended slowly but cleanly, but the long weeks of stillness that followed it. A man flat on his back has nothing to do but think, and Sebastian had 2 years of unexamined silence waiting for him the moment he stopped moving. He had no other heir living. His younger brother had died of consumption at 19, before ever marrying, which left the succession, should Sebastian himself die without a legitimate son, to pass sideways to his cousin Crispin Thornewood, a man who had gambled away 2 inheritances already not his own, who kept company with men the Dowager herself would not receive, and who had once, in Sebastian's hearing, referred to Ravenscar's tenant cottages as picturesque kindling, should the rents ever need encouraging. Crispin held no claim Sebastian could simply strip from him by displeasure. The law would hand him the title regardless of what anyone in the family wished, on the single condition that no closer heir existed to take precedence over him. It was that condition, turning over and over in Sebastian's mind through the long grey weeks of his convalescence, that would not let him rest. What if the child had been mine? What if he still is, and the law has been waiting on my word alone? He told himself it was the fall speaking, or the laudanum, or guilt dressed up as fear for the estate. He had been so certain, once. His mother's evidence had been so complete. But completeness, he was beginning to understand, is exactly what a lie requires to be believed. The truth is so rarely tidy. The unravelling began, as these things often do, with a servant who could no longer carry what she knew. Agnes Whitfield had been the Dowager's lady's maid for 11 years, long enough to dress her, undress her, and occasionally despise her, and long enough to know precisely which drawer in the writing desk held papers that were never meant to be read by anyone but the Dowager herself. She had said nothing for 2 years, but Agnes had a sister in service near Marlowe Fen, and her sister had written, all unknowing, about a kind widow named Mrs. Hale and her grey-eyed boy, and something in Agnes's conscience had finally come loose like a tooth too long rotted to hold. She did not go to Sebastian directly. She was too afraid of the Dowager to risk being seen near him. Instead, she went, trembling, to Margaret Norris, the one woman from the hall who had wept openly when Eleanor was sent away and never quite forgiven herself for not weeping louder. "I should have come forward long since," Agnes said, twisting her apron in her hands. "I was afraid of losing my place. I am more afraid now of what I'll answer for if I say nothing." What she carried was not, in the end, a tidy written confession. The Dowager was far too careful a woman to commit her own guilt to paper in any form that named itself. It was something more damning in its way, a draft of the very testimony the physician had been paid to sign, in the Dowager's hand, with his false statement written out for him to copy in his own. Agnes had taken it from the drawer 2 years before. In a moment of doubt she herself could not explain, and had not had the courage to act on it since. Margaret read it twice before she understood what she was holding. Then she went to Sebastian within the hour, and did not soften it for him, because some truths do not deserve softening. He went to his mother first. He owed her that much, if only so he might watch her face when she understood there was no longer anywhere left to hide. The Dowager Duchess did not weep. She drew herself up instead, every inch the architect she had always been, and said the words that would end whatever remained between them. "I did it to protect this family. A duke does not marry a companion, Sebastian. I gave you a way out before that girl's low blood diluted 300 years of—" "She gave me a son," Sebastian said, and his voice was not loud, which made it worse. "A son the law has recognized as mine from the hour of his birth, whether either of us chose to know it or not. You did not protect this family. You very nearly handed it to Crispin out of spite dressed up as pride, and you stole 2 years of my son's life from me to do it. Crispin would never have inherited while you lived," the Dowager said, though something in her certainty had begun, for the first time, to falter. "No," Sebastian agreed, "but he would have inherited the moment I died, and you knew it. And you let that woman raise my heir in poverty, rather than risk your pride being humbled before people whose opinions will not outlive them by a decade." He left her standing alone in the receiving hall, in the precise spot where, 2 years before, she had stood at his shoulder and watched a young woman be cast out into the world with nothing. He did not yet know if there was time to undo it. Finding her took 3 weeks, a great deal of money, and the quiet, dogged work of a man who had once commanded estates, and now applied that same relentless attention to a single name, Hale. He traced her through a chandler's ledger, a parish register, a midwife's recollection of a gentlewoman who never quite fit her own story. When his carriage finally stopped outside a small cottage at the edge of Marlowe Fen, Sebastian sat inside it for nearly 10 minutes before he could make himself open the door, because he understood, with a clarity that frightened him, that whatever happened next, he had no right to ask for it. Eleanor was in the garden when she saw him. She did not drop what she was holding, did not gasp, did not run to him or away from him. She simply straightened, Henry's small hand in hers, and looked at the man who had once told her to leave and not return, standing now at her gate, as though the intervening 2 years had not happened at all. "You should not have come," she said. "I know everything," Sebastian said. The words came out rougher than he intended. "The letters, my mother, the physician she paid to lie. I know the child was never." His voice broke on the word never. because he had rehearsed this speech for 3 weeks, and it had abandoned him entirely the moment he saw the boy's eyes. "I know he is mine. I know he was always mine, lawfully, from the day he was born, and I let a lie tell me otherwise." "He has always been yours," Eleanor said. "You simply chose not to know it." It was not an accusation shouted in anger. It was worse than that. It was calm and true, and it landed exactly where she intended. Sebastian's gaze dropped to the boy, who regarded him with the grave, assessing stare of a child who had never been taught to fear strangers because no one had ever given him reason to. Nearly 2 years old, sturdy, and unmistakably a Thornewood from the set of his brow to the colour of his eyes, Sebastian felt something in his chest give way entirely. "His name," he managed. "Henry. May I—" He stopped, started again. "I have no right to ask anything of you. I understand that. But may I know him? May I try to be worthy of being known to him?" Eleanor studied him for a long moment, and in her silence Sebastian understood, finally and completely, that her forgiveness was not a door he could simply walk through because he had arrived with the truth in his hands. He had broken something that the truth alone could not repair. "You may visit," she said carefully, "as his father, not as my husband, not yet, perhaps not ever. I will not be summoned back to Ravenscar Hall to stand in a hallway and be believed only now that it is convenient. If you want anything from me beyond that, Sebastian, you will have to earn it the way you should have defended me the first time in front of everyone who watched you send me away." It was not the answer he had hoped for. It was, he realized as he stood there with his hat in his hands like a man far beneath his own rank, exactly the answer he deserved. What followed was not a single grand reconciliation, but a slow, deliberate unmaking of everything that had been built to keep Eleanor small. For the better part of a year, Sebastian came to Marlowe Fen every fortnight without fail. He learned to sit on the cottage floor and be patiently instructed by a small boy in the correct arrangement of wooden soldiers. He mended a fence Eleanor had been meaning to mend for months and said nothing about it, because he had learned, slowly, that some kindnesses are better offered without comment. He never once asked her to hurry her own forgiveness along, and on the visits when she was cold to him, he simply came back a fortnight later, regardless. He did not wait for her trust to write to the Dowager's circle and deny the old scandal from a distance. He returned to London and stood, in person, before the very drawing rooms that had once delighted in Eleanor's disgrace, and told them the truth without a single word softened for his own comfort, that his wife had been innocent, that his mother had forged her ruin, that his son had spent the better part of 2 years in poverty because a duke had been too proud and too credulous to ask a single honest question before believing the worst of a woman who had only ever loved him. It cost him. Some doors did not reopen to him afterward, and he found he did not especially miss the people behind them. The Dowager, her fabrication exposed before the very society whose good opinion she had committed the fraud to protect, retreated to a dower house in Northumberland and was not received again by anyone who mattered to her son. Crispin's expectations, never anything more than a presumption resting on the absence of a nearer heir, simply ceased to exist the moment Henry's parentage was acknowledged and recorded beyond dispute. There was nothing left for Sebastian to strip from him, because the law had never truly given it. Crispin retreated from London within the month, his credit gone along with his prospects, and was not spoken of again in any room that mattered. But Eleanor did not return to Ravenscar Hall on the strength of an apology alone, and she told him so plainly, more than once. She returned because a year of fortnightly visits had shown her, finally, a man willing to be patient with the very thing he had once been too impatient to question. It was Henry, in the end, who closed the last distance between them, tugging his mother's hand toward his father one afternoon and asking, with the devastating simplicity of a child not yet 3, why she never smiled when his father came to visit, when she smiled at everyone else. Eleanor looked at Sebastian over their son's head, and something in her finally, quietly, let go. They were married again the following spring, 3 years almost to the day since Eleanor had been sent from Ravenscar Hall in shame, properly this time, publicly, before the same society that had once watched her cast out. Eleanor wore grey, not out of humility, but because it was the colour she had worn the day she first crossed paths with a duke in a library who had not yet learned to deserve her, and she wished, this time, for him to remember it. Henry Thornewood, not yet 3, was confirmed before the family and the parish alike as heir to Ravenscar, a formality only, since the law had named him so from his first breath. But a formality Sebastian insisted upon all the same, loudly and publicly, as the one apology that could be witnessed by everyone who had once watched his mother's lie go unchallenged. The boy grew into someone far too grave and far too kind to ever resemble the cousin who had once stood one absent heir away from inheriting in his place. The Dowager Duchess lived another decade in quiet exile in the north, and was, in the end, visited by no one but her solicitor. And Eleanor, once a companion no one thought to notice, once a woman sent away with nothing but a secret, and her dignity became, in time, the Duchess of Ravenscar in truth as well as in name. Not because a duke had finally chosen to forgive her, but because she had never once needed his permission to be exactly who she already was. If this is the kind of story that stayed with you, you know what to do. Subscribe and join us for the next tale of scandal, secrets, and second chances in the world of the ton.